Hello, internet friends, and welcome to the Legion testing second pass of the Unholy Death Knight. Now, first off, I'm going to sound a little different in this episode. I am currently working on some audio changes, so if I sound a little different, maybe a little too loud in parts, maybe not as loud as other parts, I'm still working all the kinks out, so bear with me on that one. But this will be a long one. It's just sort of like how Frost is. The more and more I've gotten into these second pass videos, I have realized that there is a whole lot more to talk about and discuss, and I have sort of fine-tuned the patterning a little bit. If you want to see all the bugs with this spec, which is almost the most I've ever seen, it's like 2 pages long. Google document, link below. If you want to watch the 6 hours of testing I did on this, linked below in the description box as well for the VOD for that, and the guide that I do all of my organizing of all this crazy nonsense and put it all together for you in a really easy to read and links Google document link down below. So, Unholy Death Knight is very fantasy tuned, and I had a lot more fun testing it as I did like 2 more hours than I did with Frost as Unholy. And Unholy has a ton of possibilities here, and it's going to get a little overwhelming. And that's why I did so much testing on it during the actual streaming segment, is because it's a little ridiculous. There's a lot going on here. We're going to go through the basic spellbook, catch you up on some things, then go through the artifact to see where all the passives and extra hooks are coming from, and then go through talents and show off spell effects, of course, throughout the big thing. But one of the biggest things you might notice, of course, with any other Death Knight you have see, is that everything is now just runes. Everything just costs runes. 1, 2, or 3 runes. There's no more Unholy, Frost, or Death runes. There's no Blood runes. It's all just runes, okay? They simplified the system. Some people like it, some people hate it. It's what it is. Also, the Unholy, Blood, and Frost presences are gone. Some of the remnants of them are still very much around, but for the most part, the presence system is no more. So you have a rune regeneration system on every single Death Knight now that is very much the own system. So there's no talent tier anymore that is all about how your runes regenerate. Some things have like rune stuff in them, or like how you gain more runes. But rune regeneration now for Unholy is Runic Corruption baseline, a 1.25% chance per runic power you spend to increase your rune regeneration rate by 100% for 3 seconds. And in the core of the kit, all you can spend runic power on is Death Strike and Death Coil, which is right here. That's it. So you either use Death Strike for your active mitigation or for your healing. I guess it's active mitigation is a different phrasing when you say it when you're a DPS, right? Or use it for Death Coil, which gives energy restored to your ghoul, as well as dealing shadow damage, which goes into your mastery. Mastery is still Dreadblade. It's just a shadow damage increase. Very simple, straightforward. On a Pale Horse, 20% more mounted speed. Simple and straightforward. Back on the Unholy Presence being gone and having the passive movement speed you're so used to, you have Death's Advance. You have 15% passive movement speed all the time. But the global haste you were given from Unholy Presence is obviously gone, since there's no Unholy Presence. Dark Secure is here. It's the free Death Strike that heals you for bonus 100% more effectiveness if you use it within after 20 seconds of killing a target that experiences or honor is granted you. Sudden Doom is still here, where your auto attacks have a chance to make your next Death Coil cost no runic power. Caveat, the Death Coil that does not cost runic power still can proc Runic Corruption, and for future references, still also counts as using runic power. That'll come into effect on 1-ish talents later on, so remember that. Wraithwalk is your new movement speed and utility ability. It just makes you have a 70% little sprint here. Unlike the Frost Death Knight, to jump into a talent real quick that only affects this ability, that Frost Death Knights get an ability to make Wraithwalk a 20% damage reduction, a 20% DR. Unholy just gets Lingering Apparition, which is a 30% faster move rate that makes it a 100% faster sprint, so it's 100% movement speed for 3 seconds, and a shorter cooldown. That is what Unholy gets with Wraithwalk, whereas Frost gets a DR. That's the only big change there. Summon Gargoyle is still here, 3-minute cooldown, 40-second duration. You have still Rune Forging, your Raised Dead, which is your ally. Your Raised Ally is your little, your in combat res, right? Path of Frost, Mind Freeze, Icebound Fortitude is 20%. The 2 is coming from a artifact perk. You have Death Grip is still here. Mass Grip, Gorfiend's Grasp is now a blood-only ability. It's a 3-minute cooldown for blood. Deathgate, as I said for Frost, if you do the Legion intro to get to the new Acarus, you will go to that Ebonhold, that Acarus, with the Deathgate summon. If you do not do that, the Deathgate will send you to the old one, which is the one in Eastern Plaguelands. Death and Decay is 1 rune, lasts for 30 seconds. The big thing about that is we will show off soon is that your Scourge Strike AoEs when you're standing inside of it. Dark Transformation now is just a 1-minute cooldown, where your ghoul will have the damage amp, and there's even an HP amp on the other ghoul, and then they get the transformed abilities. Dark Command is here if you have the taunts. If you have a tank spec in your class, you have a taunt. If you have a healing spec in your class, you have a heal. Control Undead, which I was told by Ketsu is like really, really good. Use it for a lot of things, but I never thought you would. But apparently if you were a good Unholy Death Knight, you use a lot of Control Undead. Change Device is a 70% snare for 8 seconds. It's stronger than it is currently right now in Warlords. You can ignore this. The Army of the Dead is still a 10-minute cooldown, where they last for 40 seconds. And, of course, Anti-Magic Shell, 1-minute cooldown. I brought up Death and Decay a little early there because I was just kind of strolling over stuff, and I forgot to mention in the beginning that many people are like harping on the amount of buttons or active things you have to pay attention to. Now we're going to get a little bit nitty-gritty here with the main rotation. And this is not, I don't have any talents here that are really going to change anything for me exactly. So you're not going to see any of those, and we'll go over talents, of course, after artifact weapons. But the main rotation you're going to have here, again, we went over Death Coil, is your Runic Power Spender. Shadow damage, amplified by your mastery, gives energy to your ghoul. I'm going to talent away from All Will Serve real quick, because I do not want to see that. I'll have to relog to actually make that work, I think. I'll put him on passive, so he won't freak out. Yeah, they're on passive, okay. That's Rasputin, by the way. He's the skeleton archer you get with All Will Serve, but ignore him for now. But to bring up your pet is obviously big. Yes, I know. So Death and Decay is a AoE, your only base form AoE, except your new dot. I have to go over to the WoW database to read this, but Outbreak now costs 1 rune. Think of Outbreak as Outbreak and what's it called? Unholy Blight rolled into one ability. So Outbreak is 1 rune that deals initial shadow damage to the target and surrounds the target in a miasma lasting 6 seconds that causes targets and all nearby enemies to be infected with Virulent Plague. So Virulent Plague is your new dot. It is the dot specific to Unholy only. He starts attacking with passive on? Rasputin, please! He never stops attacking. This is gonna get a little annoying. I'm sorry. He's totally broken. You can't unsummon him. You have to relog to get him out of here. So I'll do that in a moment. But Outbreak is very good at cross-dotting. Very good at cross-dotting. We're going to run away from Rasputin right now while I explain things. But the Outbreak Virulent Plague, which is only applied by Virulent Plague, reads as follows. It is a huge tooltip. It's broken right now. It's a disease that deals 294% of your attack power as shadow damage over 21 seconds. I'm still in combat. Damn you, Rasputin. It erupts. It erupts when the affected target dies, dealing 100% of attack power as shadow damage, divided amongst nearby allies. So it has a built-in corpse explosion effect if the target dies under the effect of it. Additionally, every time it ticks and deals damage, there's a 30% chance it will erupt and do the same damage it would if the target died. Okay? Now, Outbreak is an AoE, as you saw. So it AoEs around the target 8 yards and applies Virulent Plague. By default, the Virulent Plague lasts 21 seconds, but because Outbreak lasts for 6 seconds and continuously pandemics and reapplies Virulent Plague, it actually lasts for 34 seconds in total on the target and all those around it. Because it goes up for 21, it gets refreshed to 28 over and over and over again for 6 seconds, and then when these 6 seconds expires from Outbreak, you get a 28-second Virulent Plague. It's 28 because it's 27 plus the 0 countdown. So 28 plus 6, 34. So you only have to really apply Outbreak with Virulent Plague once a minute, basically. Once at the start of the minute and then once halfway through it. So 2 times in total a minute. So it's very low maintenance dot, but it does a ton of damage over the duration, as well as the chance to even do more. So it's very unholy. That's the little goopy green, blah, like throw up animation you see right there. So keeping up Virulent Plague is very important. Your other key factors here are the little mini game you play as a Unholy DK, which is called Festering Strike and Festering Wounds. So Festering Strike, which looks awesome, is a 2 rune cost attack that does physical damage and puts 2 to 4 Festering Wounds on the target. Ignore that Shambler guy right there. That's an artifact perk. So Festering Wounds deal damage when hit by Scourge Strike. The tooltip for Festering Wound counts as having, like, all of them burst at once. That's not true. When you hit a Festering Wound, it's a Pustulant Lesion that will burst on death or when damaged by Scourge Strike, or, I will also put this in here, by Clawing Shadows. I'll talk about that later more. Which deals additional shadow damage and generates 3 runic power. So the main back and forth here is you are going to Scourge Strike off these Festering Wounds. Scourge Strike still has the physical and magic damage component, and it will burst 1 Festering Wound. Cost 1 rune, cost 2 runes. And then, of course, you will dump with Death Coil. Ignoring that debuff that you have seen on the mob right there, I'll talk about that soon. So, you're never going to want to Scourge Strike without wounds on the target. That is just not how it works. Additionally, which I'll compound upon more later, Death Coil now is not exactly a build tons of RP and then dump with Death Coil. For multiple reasons, and the main one being your runic regeneration to keep the spec rolling, you want to weave Death Coils in a way, and there is a actual talent that forces you to weave them, and there is an artifact perk that entices you to weave them. Because Unholy right now on live, I played it for BRF Mythic, or BRF Heroic splits, preparing for Mythic, and as well as HFC splits. It was just like a dump everything, and then dump all your runic power, and then dump all your runes, then dump all your runic power. That's not really the case anymore. Not really the case anymore. You want to play your little minigame of stacking your Festering Wounds. You want to weave your Death Coils to hopefully proc runic corruption to keep your runes rolling. And then you, of course, want to hit a lot of Scourge Strikes into a target with Festering Wounds on them. Because it does more damage and generates more runic power to give you more Death Coils that give you more runic power through a runic corruption to give you more runes to give you more power. It's really, really, really like this huge cogwheel keeps turning and turning and turning. Okay? The change to that rotation is when you add in Death and Decay, where Death and Decay does damage to the targets in the area, and if you're in the area, your Scourge Strike will hit all enemies near the target. Now to back up real quick, Festering Strike will only be able to put 8. You can put 8 wounds on a target. That is the maximum amount you can put on there. 8 is the max. And you can refresh it. It stays up there for 24 seconds. But only 8 wounds can ever be on a target at one point in time. If a target dies with multiple wounds on them, it will count as they were popped with no damage, but give you the runic power. But if you kind of bounce around here, and you're doing like a 2 or 3 target cleave, and you're putting up a whole bunch of Festering Strikes to get a whole bunch of Festering Wounds up here, and then you hit Death and Decay, and you hit Scourge Strike, your Scourge Strike AoEs. So if there are wounds on these targets, your Scourge Strike will hit them. And not only will your Death and Decay be hitting them, your Scourge Strikes, where is it? Right here. Scourge Strikes Your physical will attack, and then your... Oh my goodness, it's all broken up. That's so weird. Yeah, here's a better one. So Scourge Strike, Scourge Strike, Scourge Strike, and then Shadow, Shadow. For some reason, hitting this boss dummy wasn't hitting this guy sometimes. Like, he's at a different angle for some odd reason. But your Scourge Strike is duplicated to all targets within 8 yards of the one you are hitting inside your Death and Decay. And you will then also pop Festering Wounds on those targets that you're not directly attacking, but are being hit by your Scourge Strike while in your D&D. So there is a interesting synergy with, like, this AoE cleaving burst component with the Unholy Death Knight. It takes some setup. It definitely takes some setup. But it's highly rewarding when you're just seeing... Not only are you gaining the runic power for bursting those, you're doing more damage to those targets because you're bursting them as well. And you're doing more damage because, you know, to those AoE targets because you're hitting them while you're also AoEing them all down. And it's a really cool synergy with Death and Decay and how Scourge Strike works. On a side note for Scourge Strike, Demon Hunters Havoc have a ability called Chaos Strike. Chaos Strike, in the combat log, has 2 attacks. But it is actually 1 damage attack roll. So if that ability were to crit, both things in the combat log crit, because it's 1 ability just cut in half so the animation works. Scourge Strike, on the other hand, has a physical and a shadow damage component. Now, what that means is that it's not locked in to only one of them critting, or both critting, or whatever reason, if one were to crit. You saw right there, the only shadow part of it crit. Because either component of the physical or shadow damage can crit independently of itself. That comes into play with a very important talent, but please remember that, because it does not have a one... It's a shadow crit again there, with the death coil, sorry. It's obviously a little random. I only have so much crit on this PvP gear, but it's just a shadow critting again right there. Both of them can crit independently, or the shadow can crit, or the physical can crit. So it kind of has a little bit of RNG built into it. I think it's the same way it happens on live, but it's different that they added in a new ability that's very similar to this, but the Havoc Demon Hunter, it's a yes or no. Did it crit or did it not crit? That doesn't apply to Scourge Strike. It's very interesting. I didn't know that until I got really deep into testing today, so. That is all of your core abilities, so keep up your dot. Put your Pestilent Festering Wounds up here. Gross. Pop them with Scourge Strike. Weave in your Death Coils to keep your runic corruption going, and keep going. Just stack those up. You always want to make sure you're Scourge Striking into these Festering Wounds, because it's very, very important. And that's the core. Obviously, transforming your ghoul is part of the rotation. He lasts for 20 seconds by default with a 1-minute cooldown. There's no super weird nonsense with Death Coil unless you take a certain talent we'll talk about later. So the artifact now, Apocalypse. It shall sow destruction and war, famine and death. It shall tempt with power, and then bring an end to all life. Grants you the Apocalypse ability. So this has been changed like 9 times, or 17 times, or like 4. Like every build it's been changing. And the current version, I think, and what I gathered from chat during the testing stream, is this is the best version. It feels the most Unholy Death Knight-y, and has the best feel to the spec, or adds the best feel to the spec. So you burst all Festering Wounds on your current target. Only one current target. And you summon a member of your Army of the Dead for each burst Festering Wound. So 8 maximum. So if you do it, the animation right now doesn't like do anything. It also is a bugged range. It has like a 3-yard range right now instead of a 5-yard range for some reason. But so this is a 1.5 minute or 90-second cooldown. You pop this up here. Boom. Suddenly, 8 ghouls. And then, of course, you can stack that with Army of the Dead. And then you have 18 ghouls, because Army of the Dead summons another 10. The debuffs they're putting up there as an artifact perk. We'll talk about that soon. So you feel very Army of the Dead-ish. At least I think you do. It's pretty cool. I don't know where my ghoul went. Oh, he's right there. But it's very rotational. It has a good additional synergy with managing your festering wounds properly. It has a small little window of, okay, I have Apocalypse coming up in 10 seconds. Let me make sure I have 8 festering wounds up. Bam, there it is. Apocalypse, give me eight little, zombie buddies, ghoul buddies. They don't last as long as the undead ones from Army of the Dead. Army of the Dead ghouls last much longer, 40 seconds. The apocalypsed ghouls, I do believe, lasts 12, I was being told? 10? Somewhere in there. Because they're a much shorter duration cooldown, they're a much shorter duration life. But they're more rotational, they'll pop up multiple times during an encounter. It feels cool to keep summoning these undead ghouls, right? That's part of the class fantasy. And it's really neat. I think it's pretty cool. Unlike making cool puns, because I'm not playing Frost Death Knight. Alright, let's talk about Apocalypse. I'm going to roll through everything kind of in a generalized fashion, because some of these things are really self-explanatory. So, that's your Apocalypse. You have Feast of Souls, 8% more shadow damage. It's just free mastery. That's all it is. Rotten Touch is 15% more damage on Festering Strike, which increases the physical damage it does. Runic Tattoos is you get 15% more runic power, and everything generates 10% more runic power. So I don't know if you noticed in the combat log, a Scourge Strike is 11 runic power, not 10. That's the 10% in action. A Festering Strike is 22 runic power instead of 20. A Outbreak is 11. It's not, a Death and Decay is 11. It's just a small extra bonus to your runic power cap and your runic power generation. Portal to the Undead, a portal to the underworld, affects your little undead ghouls. So many undead, dead things. Your Army of the Dead ghouls explode when they die, dealing a bunch of shadow damage to nearby enemies. This is currently bugged with the wrong amount, and I'm not sure if it's a amount per summon of Army of the Dead or not, but it also works on your ghouls you summon from Apocalypse. As you see here, it's called Drag to Hell. It's pretty awesome. But it only pops like 900 damage or 1820. So I don't think it's working properly with the amount of damage it should do, but it is shadow damage, so it does scale with your mastery. So your Apocalypsed ghouls and your Army of the Dead ghouls all explode when they die, dealing AoE damage. But the number is obviously not correct right now. They'll fix that in the future. But it gives another synergy. People were complaining about how, like, Army of the Dead is such a crap cooldown still. They last for so long, and they also all blow up when they die for extra damage. And then you get to rotate in Apocalypses throughout the entire fight anyway, so you're getting more value also. So, I think it's cool. It's neat. It's very deadly. The Darkest Crusade is you increase the effect of your Fallen Crusader Rune Forge by 21%. So I don't have Fallen Crusader on my weapon right now. That is the only Rune Forge you'll be able to use, or you will use as Unholy. Whoops. Yes, I know, I'm sorry. So it does actually say on the tooltip that it's a 7.3% heal and 30.3% strength for 15 seconds. If you take off Apocalypse, it will diminish the effect to 6% and 25% as it normally has always been. So it automatically maxes on the tooltip, which is pretty powerful. You'll be using Fallen Crusader all the time. That's just how it works. It's cool that you get a artifact perk that buffs the Rune Forge you put on it. It's neat. The back and forth synergy is very interesting. One of your, and why I talked about Death Coil so much a little while ago, Scourge of Worlds. Death Coil has a chance, I know it just doesn't say what the chance is, it's annoying, to increase your Scourge Strike damage against that target by 50% for 6 seconds. That is the debuff you were seeing on the mob. And it is a huge component. It buffs both parts of the strike, both the physical and shadow damage. So in a way, it is 100% bonus to Scourge Strike, but it's just 50% to the overall effect. It just happens to be a split damage attack. But that does sort of impact crits, because again, they crit independently of one another, but they are both gaining the 50% more damage. So if you gain the damage bonus from Scourge of Worlds and just a physical damage crits or the shadow damage crits, you're still gaining more damage on top of that as well. So, but that goes back to the fact that you don't want to just dump all your death coils at the end of a rune rotation, because then you're going to have no runes to cast Death Strike. Or, sorry, Scourge Strike, not Death Strike. That comes in later. That's a weird ability that actually you have to use as Unholy. So Scourge of Worlds is different because it makes you rotate through your death coils, which is... I don't know if you're going to like that playstyle. It makes it so you have to play a little differently as the Unholy Death Knight, but... Eternal Agony is in the 6-second duration increase on your Dark Transformation, so he lasts for 26 seconds there. Scourge the Unbeliever, not Shun the Non-Believer, but Scourge the Unbeliever is Scourge Strike has a 10% chance to generate 1 rune. That is a flat chance on just casting Scourge Strike. It just gives you a rune back, basically. It refunds the cost of it, which sometimes happens. You might be able to see it right here real quick. It'll just light up immediately after I cast it. Probably won't work now that I'm actually waiting for it to happen. Are you going to work? Nope. You're not going to work, are you? Nope. Nope. You're a butt. Nope. Not going to work. It's a 10% chance. Like, it's not going to happen very often. It just gives you a little bit of rune RNG to play around with. If it procs, you're like, ooh, another Scourge Strike, you know? Or, ooh, I get to Festering Strike faster. That's all it is. Yeah, it's not going to proc right now, you butt. Plague Bearer is 15% more damage by Virulent Plague. This is just your dot. I don't know, and we didn't confirm, but I'm pretty damn sure because the Virulent Eruption is a different spell ID. Virulent Plague is only being affected here, just the dot damage over time. Deadly Durability is increases the effectiveness of your AMS shield and IBF by 10%. That's why you got 2% extra damage reduction on your IBF, and there's just a larger HP absorption shield on the AMS. Gravitational Pull is Death Grip will also slow the target by 70% for 6 seconds, which was a Frost ability, I've been told, but you do get a 70% slow on the target you grip to yourself, which is pretty wild. That's a huge slow on top of a grip, so that's pretty beast. Deadliest Coil is 15% more death coil damage. Unholy Endurance is you take 15% less damage from all area of effect attacks. Every class or spec has something that's like this, where it's damage reduction or magic damage reduction or physical damage reduction. It's kind of neat that Unholy has AoE damage reduction. It's different, but it works into the whole magic thing. That's that. Armies of the Damned, which is why I got this confused down here. Ghouls summoned by Army of the Dead apply additional effects with their claw attack. That's their special basic attack. They can put Death up, which increases damage taken on the target. War, reducing the target's healing done. Famine, which reduces the damage the target deals. And Pestilence, which is a damage over time, shadow dot. That totally does nothing. It does 1 damage over 6 seconds. These only affect the Death Knight. Currently, the Death debuff actually increases damage done by anyone attacking that target, which is no good. It only affects the Death Knight, so the damage the target would do and the damage the target takes from the death buff right here only affects the Death Knight itself. And they're very random. As you see right here, they're just kind of like they pop on and pop off. They're not incredibly impactful. They're much more impactful on Army of the Dead because they last for 40 seconds. Double Doom is that Sudden Doom can accumulate 2 charges and will occur 15% more frequently. Sudden Doom only procs off auto attacks, and we don't know the actual chance for it. I was told like 25% to 30% today during this testing, which is maybe. Just means that you can store 2 charges of it, which does impact 1 talent rotation changer. But for the most part, it's just insurance that if you can't hit a death coil immediately, you do have the, oh, well, it can store 2 charges now, so I don't have to hit it right now, because that's the worst feeling when you get like a Sudden Doom proc, and then you can't hit it, and then it procs again. You see like the refresh of the icon, and you're like, oh, I lost a death coil. So now you get a little bit of wiggle room there. And your last one is called the Shambler, which is just your attacks have a chance to summon that super zombie that shambles forward and explodes and deals shadow damage to nearby enemy. That's the Shambler you saw walking around there, which now that I want him to actually proc, probably won't proc. But it's off of your attacks, so any attack has a chance to summon the Shambler. But it's just random, sort of thematic, unholy, cool-looking random damage. It's not really anything you can really... Is you parrying me? Come on now. It's not only anything you can really plan for. It just happens. The Shambler will randomly spawn and will randomly explode and do damage to people nearby. That's it. You might see him here a couple times more during the video, but that's all he does. He's just the dark transformed little guy right here. He just walks forward and shambles forward and explodes. So that is Apocalypse. People were asking me in the Frost Death Knight video and why the live stream, these artifacts, circles you're going to see in my videos that don't have any links are like a quote-unquote paragoning style system that we don't know enough about right now in Legion. That is a place that you can put additional and more artifact power in for just a really kind of simple, flat, all damage increase gain at 0.5% per level. But that might not be able to be unlocked until later in the expansion, or down the road where you have the whole thing unlocked, maybe get a quest to unlock this thing. We don't know a lot how it works yet, so I didn't talk about it much in the Frost video because I have no idea. I can't test it, so I don't know. Talent time. To go over the ones that don't have a huge impact on your rotation real quick. Debilitating Infestation is an outbreak, and the pulsing it does makes a 50% snare on all targets as they get hit by it for 3 seconds. Just an AoE snare. Asphyxiate, which is getting buffed soon, I've been told. This is a 2-minute cooldown, soon to be a 45-second cooldown, and no longer channeled. It's just Force Choke. It's a 6-second stun. That's it. It's just Force Choke. And that's about all it doesn't make. I mean, I walked over Lingering Apparition earlier. Spell Eater is 20% larger anti-magic shell, and it lasts 5 seconds longer. Corpse Shield is interesting real quick. Corpse Shield is a 1-minute cooldown where in the next 10 seconds, 90% of all damage you take is transferred to your ghoul. If the ghoul is slain, however, while the spell is active, it cannot be resummoned for 30 seconds. This is super powerful with Sludge Belcher. It's okay with the regular ghoul, but Sludge Belcher is a empowered or a stronger version, not DPS-wise, but ability and HP-wise. You get a little Stitches pet right here. This is a more tanky version. It has like a 300,000 more health. So the more HP that can be soaked by your pet through Corpse Shield, the stronger Corpse Shield is. Sludge Belcher has more HP, and it also has an ability. There he is. Sludge Belcher has an ability called Protective Bile, which is not a channeled ability like Huddle is, but it is a 50% damage reduction or 60% while under Dark Transformation. So I'm pretty sure there are going to be macros being made in the future where you're going to be able to Dark Transformation, your little dude. They're going to pop Corpse Shield as well as Protective Bile at the same time. He'll take 60% less damage, but you'll take 90% less because that 90% goes over to your guy, to your little ghoul here, to Fester Blister, that name, and it'll mitigate the damage incoming, but you'll also take a whole lot less damage because your pet is soaking the damage. And Corpse Shield works on all damage you take, whereas Spell Eater is just a stronger AMS, and Lingering Apparition is just a movement speed sprint. So Corpse Shield might be too powerful, but it also might be the culprit that the Sludge Belcher here has too much extra HP. I'm not sure, but Corpse Shield is very, very powerful. The Sludge Belcher also gets a hook ability where you can pull himself to a target. Okay, or don't. Or don't pull yourself, that's fine. He has a different Cleaver ability. It's just called Cleaver. It does the same damage. When he's in Dark Transformation, however, he does a fart. He just starts farting. And the fart does AoE damage around it. So it is a small DPS gain because the Dark Transformation version of your regular ghoul just hits one target plus 2 as a melee cleave. Whereas the little Fester fart you summon here actually is an AoE. Alright, other talents here. All Will Serve, I told you, your Raise Dead spell summons an additional skeletal minion. He just auto-attacks and then multi-shots. He does way too much damage right now. He also is not controllable with the pet bar. He does also not adhere to the certain pet bar. Same thing happens with Hati for Beast Mastery Hunters. You just can't control them. You have to relog to like re-summon it if it dies as well. So that's just bugged. Bursting Sores is 50% more festering wound damage when burst, and then when you burst one, it will then AoE other targets around it. Not the target, not this target, because you're already bursting the festering wound anyway, but the festering wound burst on the target is 50% stronger, and the one that flies off of it is like the base version, basically, the 18-9. So it is a single target DPS increase, but going back to the whole nonsense of like putting up a whole bunch of festering wounds on targets, and then using Death and Decay, and then AoEing, which I can't really do because I don't have any runes. This does work with it, where you can blast off all of these wounds, and what will happen is the boss dummy's wound pops, hits the side targets. When you pop the festering wounds with your Scourge Strike on the side targets because of the cleave, they'll pop, hit the other targets, and the dummy in the middle. But not, again, they don't hit themselves. But the ones that are popping because of the Death and Decay synergy are doing more damage. It's a lot going on there. Ebon Fever is your Virulent Plague, just ticks twice as fast, or deals damage in half the time. So, back on what I said earlier, it lasts for 34 seconds normally, it lasts for 17 now, because it ticks twice as fast. Which means the dot ticks faster, so more upfront damage, also more virulent eruptions can happen, which deal more AoE damage. But it's more of a passive and uptime controlling thing, whereas Bursting Spores is literally a passive, because you're already going to be bursting wounds anyway, and All Will Serve is also a passive, because you just get another pet. So it'll come down to like flavor versus other talent synergies, or how you want to play the Unholy Death Knight. I like Ebon Fever and Rasputin the most. Bursting Sores to me is kind of... it doesn't feel as fun with interplay in the other abilities you have here, so... Speaking of interplay, Blighted Rune Weapon is kind of boring, but like really good. It's a 1 minute cooldown where your next 4 auto attacks just infect your target with 2 festering wounds. So that means over the course of the next 4 swings, you'll put 8 wounds up. So you can, it's kind of like a mini burst cooldown, or like on the pull, like on demand festering wound. It doesn't mean you can cast less festering strikes and hit more scourge strikes, so you don't have to waste GCDs on the weaker of the abilities you have here, because scourge strike does more damage than festering. Pestilent Pustules, or I like to say as it's Postulios, based on the Invader Zim episode where he gets a big zit on his face, is every 5th festering wound you burst, you grants you 1 rune. So this is just a rune regeneration mechanism, basically. As you're bursting wounds, you get a rune every 5 wounds. If you are AoEing with the nonsense of like cleaving around here, you will get runes faster because you are bursting more wounds, obviously. But it's hard to really quantify that when I was testing, because it's hard to like see. The timer with Pestilent Postulios is always rolling. So if you're in combat for a while, I saw that if I already bursted like 2 or 3, and then I get out of combat and go back into combat and I burst 2, I get a rune. So I couldn't always manage the timer, because sometimes you don't, it's just weird. So let's talk about Epidemic. Epidemic is amazing. It's a 10-second recharge, 3 charges based on your haste, where 1 rune, and you cause each of your virulent plagues to flare up. Each of your virulent plagues to flare up. It deals additional shadow damage, heavy shadow damage to the target it's afflicted by the virulent plague, and then a additional, much smaller amount of damage to enemies nearby. So it basically is Fire Nova, but easier to use. But it does a ton of damage. So your virulent plague is ticking, your eruption's going off, and then you can just epidemic spam, and it hits the targets that it's hitting with, on the targets, the 3 of them for the larger amount. But then since there are 3 targets here, like the epidemic on the left and the right are hitting the middle target twice, and the middle one is hitting the other targets once each. That's why you're seeing all these epidemic hits in that very small window. This is 1 cast right here. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hits in 1 GCD. So you can see how Epidemic will just like scale out of control on higher amounts of AoE, but it does do more damage to the individual targets than the AoE component. But again, spreading with Outbreak is like really easy. All you do is hit Outbreak on multiple targets, like spread around in large areas, or when the ads are clumped up, just one Outbreak and then Epidemic. That's hard to say very fast. Unholy Frenzy is kind of boring but really good. It's when a Festering Wound bursts, you get 100% increased attack speed. It's just, it looks kind of goofy because you attack so fast all of a sudden. But it's good for proccing Sudden Doom because you just attack faster. Overall, you'll have just more auto attacks in your rotation, and you'll just have the chance to proc more Sudden Dooms, which more Sudden Dooms is more Runic Corruption, more Sudden Dooms is more damage, more Sudden Dooms is more Scourge of Worlds. Castigator is very weird. Each Festering Strike critical strike applies 2 Festering Wounds, and then each Scourge Strike critical strike bursts 1 additional Festering Wound. This does work with the weird component of that Scourge Strike is 2 separate attacks. The tooltip is misleading. If you critical strike with a Scourge Strike, you will eat 3 wounds, which does count for 3 wounds popping and gaining you. There we go. So that Scourge Strike had 1 critical hit in it, and it ate 2 wounds. 1 wound here, 1 wound there. 1 from the additional, and 1 from the base ability. And it does give you the Runic Power. I was kind of capped right there, so I didn't get to see the Runic Power generation. But it can eat up to 3 at one point in time. So if you get like lucky with super high crits, I did 2 again there, right there. So Festering Wound 3, Festering Wound 3. So I gain the extra damage from the Festering Wound popping, of course. Right now, of course, I have Bursting Sword, so it's AoEing around it. I'll turn that off. And it's crazy. It's really good. I like Castigator a lot. It's kind of RNG oriented and very crit heavy, but it's also like it's pretty strong. It's just more damage. It's less Festering Strikes because it gains you more if on crits, and it's more damage into Scourge Strikes, and more RP generation, and more Death Coils, or the loop. It just keeps going. Clawing Shadows is weird. It replaces your main ability Scourge Strike with a single target attack with only 1 critical hit roll, because it's only 1 damaging source, that actually is a ranged attack. It does flat shadow damage, so it will always do more damage than a basic Scourge Strike due to the fact that it doesn't have to worry about armor. It may eventually outscale. It does still work with your Death and Decay. But it also does this weirdness, which I never know if this is going to be worth it, but it makes you a ranged class. I don't know if this is intentional or not. It is doing exactly what Death and Decay is supposed to do. But it's also really weird, because you're never going to be able to do this unless you're, like, PvPing on, like, the bridge in Alterac Valley or weird arena shenanigans, because in a raid, if you're this far away and you use that, you're, like, wasting your Death and Decay possibility. But I guess I see if you're, like, running away from a boss and there's a cleave target, this could be a big thing. But Clawing Shadow by itself is just a ranged component to not only be a stronger Scourge Strike, if you have good mastery scaling, but just to be more, and it does gain the benefit of Scourge of Worlds, just to be a additional thing to do if you're like running around and you're like really out of range for a long time. It gives you an actual ranged attack. It's kind of weird. I don't know. I wish something flew out of the Death Knight and not just like you strike at the air and you hit the target away from it, but yeah. It's cool. I guess. It's neat, I suppose. It's just kind of video gamey. Infected Claws we were seeing earlier, where your Ghoul's Claw attack has a 50% chance to cause a festering wound on the target. This used to work with the Vile Gas when you put them into a fart monster, but the special attack that applies the Infected Claw is only on the single target. It does not apply during the Poop Cloud. So they nerfed it and or fixed it because that was insane. So it's just a chance to give random festering wounds by your Ghoul's auto attacks, which is fine. It's just pet synergy. It just helps your rotation to keep up festering wounds on the target. Or you can make your Ghoul attack something else to start stacking wounds, and then you can drop D&D and Scourge Strike stuff, and then pop all the wounds over all the place. The next two, this ability right here, Infected Claws, doesn't really affect your rotation very much. These next two abilities do. And when I said 40 minutes ago or 30 minutes ago or so, there are abilities that actually affect your rotation. Now, Scourge of Worlds makes you want to interweave your death coils. Necrosis makes you want to interweave them, yes, all the time, forever, only do this. Because dealing damage with a death coil causes your next Scourge Strike, or Clawing Shadows, to deal 25% increased damage. So this means you have to rotate through. You cannot just spam random death coils anymore. You want to always follow up, if you can, a death coil with a Scourge Strike to gain the damage. And this stacks with Scourge of Worlds if that procs. That's obviously the much stronger version. Necrosis is guaranteed, and Scourge of Worlds is a chance. But utilizing the two playstyles together of the weaving, if you like the weaving version, then Necrosis is for you. If you don't, and you like the pooling version, that's back too. Because Shadow Infusion is when your ghoul is not transformed. Death Coil will also reduce the remaining cooldown of Dark Transformation by 5 seconds. So, this does have you need like a weak aura, and you want to pool your energy, your runic power, when this is about to fall off. So if I empower our little fart friend here, he's going to town, doing his thing, he's farting around, literally. And we're just kind of doing our Death Knight stuff and putting our wounds up and attacking things and whatnot. We're like, oh, what's our weak aura say? 12 seconds, we're okay. I don't have a weak aura, obviously, on the testing. So I'll fire off a free Death Coil right there. Why not? I'll do the Festering Strike. What are we at right now? Oh, this is a visual bug. Okay, so that's about done. So now, he's no longer transformed. This is on cooldown. So you Death Coil, Death Coil, Death Coil, and then this, and then Death Coil, and then back, and then, oh, look, and he's Fart Monster again. So, Necrosis is weaving Death Coils. Infected Claws, no change to the base rotation. Shadow Infusion, rather, is the pool playstyle. But you still have to remember Scourge of Worlds is there. So you still can't just do what I just did. I don't think that's incredibly effective. But I'm also not a high-end Death Knight player, so I don't know if that's the right choice. But having the higher uptime on Fart Monster, if you take Sludge Belcher, of course, that's the best thing to do. Because Fart Monster always AoEs. You don't have to take Fart Monster if you're single targeting. You can take one of these two. But these do nothing for raiding, really. So why not have a Stitches and a Fart Monster? It's just good. If you like this playstyle. If you don't, you take Necrosis, play the Weaving playstyle. If you don't like that, you can take Infected Claw. And these three talents on 90 really impacted rotation more than anything else in this whole talent sheet. Like, they change your priority on how you play the Unholy Death Knight and how you weave your Death Coils or not. So, that's your choices there. I've had Soul Reaper equipped this whole time. It doesn't work as it's supposed to right now because it's changed multiple times in this build, in these builds. But it costs 1 rune. It has no animation right now currently. And it's a huge 45-second rotational cooldown that does a ton of shadow damage to the target, and then inflicts the target with Soul Reaper for 5 seconds. What you need to do then as the Death Knight is bursting a festering wound on the enemy afflicted by Soul Reaper grants you 7% haste for 15 seconds, stacking 3 times. So, if you go back to like Castigator, you could Soul Reaper and then Scourge Strike once and then pop 3 wounds and be done. Or you could do it twice or 3 times, like normal, and gain the 21% haste for 15 seconds, up to 3 stacks, right? 7, 14, 21. So that's a rotational, sort of short-form cooldown. If you like playing with Soul Reaper. Target swapping, moving around a lot, that's how it might work out well. Defile is back, and it is so good. I'm making the weird, funny, squinty eyes right now because it's really good. It replaces D&D, as it does. 3-second cooldown, the same. 1 rune. It deals the whole damage component. Every 1 second, if there's enemies within the Defile, it will, deal damage, and then it will grow in size. It doesn't grow in damage, essentially. Excuse me. It grows in giving you mastery. So 150 mastery per stack, up to 10 stacks, which is 1500 mastery, and that makes it do more damage because you're gaining more mastery through more shadow damage. The one weird thing is you're going to see right there is Defile lasts 10 seconds, but the Defile Mastery buff continuously stacks and then refreshes itself, so you actually get 5 seconds of the 1500 Mastery buff after Defile is gone. So the big thing that I was talking about today during the stream was Ebon Fever, could tick super fast, Epidemic, and Defile is very, very strong. So not only do you get a faster ticking dot, you also get the mastery bonus from Defile that makes your dot tick faster and your virulent eruptions do more damage. And then once the 10 mastery stack is up, then you Epidemic the heck out of them. So it deals 100k plus crits right there. You have the mastery bonus, plenty of time to Epidemic spam. Your virulent plagued Ebon Fever plague is ticking faster with tons of mastery. It's a lot of burst AoE and cleave. That's the Defile style. All three of these talents sort of impact your rotation, but not really. They're supplementary. And the other one, welcome to the Breath of Sindragosa for the Unholy Death Knight in Dark Arbiter. This girl is a Dark Valkyr. She looks awesome. I'm only going to show her off once because I don't have enough time in the video to show off more. 3-minute cooldown replaces Gargoyle. Gargoyle is kind of like a smooth DPS increase, right? It lasts a long time, has a very, smooth feel to it, very placid damage increase. It'll change targets with you. It just kind of does this little, angry, green blast wrath thing. Dark Arbiter, total opposite. 15 seconds, this chick trucks things. She will attack 7 times with no haste. She will almost attack 9 times in Heroism or Bloodlust. So she is a cast time spell, which is her attack. And she does 1% increased damage for every 1 runic power you spend. Now, there's the Shambler. But one thing you might be saying about now, as we try to wrap this up, with Dark Arbiter being, really fun and this new minigame, sort of, and I'm sure oh my god, the Shamblers, really? Is that Death Coil, these Shamblers, though. Death Coil is only, well, it's instant now, but it only costs 30 runic power. So if you cast a Death Coil, you'll give the Dark Arbiter 30% more damage. It's additive. It keeps going, but she'll only attack 7 times at no haste. But Death Strike is 40 runic power. I have 115 RP. So, because she doesn't last very long, you want to put as much runic power spent as fast as you can into her duration, so that more of her attacks are at 200+% damage. So, it's weird to think, but during our testing, it looked like you would cast Death Strike after you cast and summon your Arbiter. Because casting 2 Death Strikes is 80% damage. Casting 2 Death Coils is only 60. It would take you 3 GCDs to do 90% damage, but 4 GCDs to do 120% damage bonus. And the damage she does, believe me, based on tuning right now anyway, is a whole lot better than the little damage you're going to lose on the physical component of Death Strike. I'm not sure if this is intentional or not, but she does a ridiculous amount of damage. And let's see. So I have full RP right now. I'm going to summon her, and we're going to do Death Strike, Death Strike. We're going to pop a free Death Coil. We're going to do one other ability, Death Strike again. And she is currently at 150% damage, and she's going to get off 2 more attacks. One more attack, baby girl, and there you go. 357k crit. And I could have stacked a little more runic power there for that last attack. Could have been even higher. So this is 7 strikes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 Valkyr strikes from the Valkyr Battle Maiden. It does a ton of damage, and I'm pretty sure Death Striking into her being summoned is going to be the better bet, because you want to put as much damage into her as possible via runic power expenditure to make her very short amount of auto attacks do so much damage. And that's why it's kind of this weird interplay and talking about how it's the breath of Sindragosa for Unholy. Because, like, Defile, yeah, you have, like, the Mastery window, and Soul Reaper, you have the little, you know, break the wounds during the 5 seconds to give yourself some haste. They all have mini-games, and Dark Arbiters is spend as much runic power as possible within the lowest amount of GCDs to make her do as much damage as possible. And those are really cool. Whereas, like, Infected Claw gives you the basic rotation, Necrosis gives you a weaving rotation, Shadow Infusion gives you, like, the pool and spend rotation, sort of. Dark Arbiter gives you this, like, sort of Breath Sindragosa, like, oh my gosh, franticness. Defile has that crazy Mastery burst window with, like, Epidemic and Ebon Fever. And Soul Reaper is kind of like a you know, kind of a cruising, you know, popping wounds and getting haste build. So the last 6 talents, the last 2 talent rows for Unholy are really cool in their interplay and their contributions to different play styles for the Unholy DK, for sure. And that is the Unholy Death Knight in a nutshell. Like a great, big, giant nutshell. Thank you all so much for joining me on this almost hour-long adventure. All the second pass videos are going to be kind of long because there's so much to go over. I appreciate everyone sticking with me. If you made it through this video, say, "We did it!" in the comment section. Hit that like button. Helps me out a great deal. Subscribe for more of these in the future. Check out the video description box below for other ways you can support what I do here on FinalBossTV. Buy yourself a shirt. There's an Arthas shirt. Death Knight fans, Arthas shirts on sale. And I will see you all in the next Legion video.